Hello and welcome to Political Brew. I'm Phil Hirschkorn. Our topics this week: immigration crackdown, how President Trump's deployments are affecting Maine; U.S. military attacks on ships from Venezuela; questions from Maine's congressional delegation about who's giving what orders; climate change, is Maine on pace or behind its lofty goals to use more renewable energy; and helping homeless people, is Portland bearing an unfair share of the burden for the state? Our guests are Lisa Kiem, former state assistant Republican leader and currently an Oxford County commissioner, and B.J. McCollister, former chief of staff to Democratic State Senate President Troy Jackson, currently a Maine delegate to the Democratic National Committee. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
President Trump's deployment of immigration and customs enforcement agents to mostly Democratic-led cities has spread to Minneapolis, following roundups in New Orleans, Charlotte, Memphis, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington. The Minneapolis operation, targeting Somalis at 80,000 residents, the largest such community in the nation, most of the former refugees now U.S. citizens. Trump this week calling them garbage.
They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason.
Trump's rhetoric making Maine's largest Somali community, several thousand in Lewiston, uneasy. Trump's comments condemned mostly by Democrats ranging from Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, last year's Veep candidate, to Maine Governor Janet Mills. Some of the detained have criminal records, but most don't, according to widespread reporting.
And it's just not right that for a few who did whatever they did wrong to just affect all the Somali people in America. That's wrong.
And this week, hundreds of Portland high school students walked out of class to stage a protest of immigration arrest, such as a family of 4 from the Democratic Republic of Congo thought to be detained in Texas and facing deportation, and the arrest of a Honduran man after dropping off his son at an elementary school.
But we did this because staying quiet didn't feel like an option. If something is wrong, ignoring it does not make it disappear.
So there's a lot to unpack there going across the country. Clearly in Maine, the Lewiston community, the Somali community, perhaps having the strongest reaction. BJ, let's start with you. What's the first thing that comes to your mind given that roundup of the week's news?
Well, you know, I think it clearly demonstrates that there is an intense rhetoric that's happening coming out of the White House. I think there's danger in what the president's saying. You know, the type of statements that he's made is the type of thing that might result in people, you know, at least showing hatred, if not some sort of violence, and it's deeply concerning.
Lisa?
I think anyone calling a group of people garbage is just monstrous. I mean, that's just no way to talk about people. I do want to see us, deport those that are illegal. I wish they would self-deport. That is the right thing to do. If you know that you're in America and you're not supposed to be, then go back home. But and I want to make sure that the fraud and abuse in the systems, which is I know where a lot of this stems from, is what's happening in Minnesota with, allegedly some Somali people, I would say probably being used by nonprofits, right? And in order to siphon money. So I think that we need to move people out, the people that are here legally, that have immigrated legally. They want to see other people respect the law, and we do too. We are a nation of laws. And if people don't like the laws that are set up, then they should change them. That's what Congress is for. But ICE, speaking of dangerous rhetoric, which I agree with you about Trump saying that about a whole, group of people. But the other thing is that calling ICE agents Gestapo, which is what's been happening again and again, and even you mentioned a Portland dad who was detained. Well, he was actually just arrested for domestic violence assault and let out on $100 bail. So, we have laws, they can be changed, but it is really dangerous to our law enforcement agents, the men and women who are serving us, and they are upholding our laws. To call them Gestapo, we're not taking people and sending them to prison camps. We are sending them back home because they broke our laws being here. And I think we have to tone down that rhetoric because these are our fellow citizens that are putting their lives at stake to go and enforce the laws that have legally been passed. So the process really needs to be looked at.
What do you think about that? And what, to some degree, people do have criminal records who are being targeted. To a larger degree, it seems they don't. But there's also the tactics of going near schools and work sites, outside Home Depots where people sometimes gather to get work. Do the ends justify the means? Are the tactics concerning? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the two students from Portland that were taken, they're here, they're students, they're members of the community. The young man that was taken, he plays on the local soccer team, local soccer club. Everything that's been said about him is very positive, and he has done nothing wrong. And so I think that the fact that we're targeting children is a little bit terrifying, but don't just take it from me. Polling has just come out that shows the majority of Americans don't support Trump's immigration approach. And I think it's because of the things that are happening, particularly with the taking of children and separating families. Whether or not someone is here legally or not doesn't mean that they should be separated from their family, especially if there's not, an underlying violent crime or anything like that, which in the case of this family that is seeking asylum or was seeking asylum, there's nothing to indicate that there was a underlying violent crime or anything like that was committed.
Lisa, what about that? The impact on the families, especially when there's minors and lack of due process, perhaps? A lot of hearings?
20 million people here illegally right now. And in order to, and what that's doing is that's overburdening the system completely. I mean, the point of immigration is integration, right? Bring them in, help them understand what it is to become an American, right? Don't come here if you don't want to become an American. We want immigration, but there has to be a process. And right now it was just, we were imploded. We were invaded really with wide open borders. And now there is a real mess. I mean, part of the thing that's forgotten is that a lot of the open borders also allowed so much child trafficking and human trafficking. And so now we have a very messy situation. And this is not going to get cleaned up without mistakes being made. And no one wants to see those. No one wants to see, children hurt. But I would disagree that children are targeted. Children are not targeted. Illegal immigrants are targeted. And then if they have children, they need to deport as a family. It's more important that the father and mother take their children than that they somehow stay here, in my opinion. But if their children are Americans, then maybe that's something they need to deal with. But again, if they would take the proactive approach of saying, hey, I'm not legal, I need to do something about that, then they don't have to sit home and be worried about what is ICE going to do, because ICE is law enforcement. These are our laws. We are a nation of laws.
And like it or not, a lot of these folks are caught up with asylum applications, which take years to process and have a very low approval rate. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Political Brew. Scrutiny is intensifying over U.S. military strikes on alleged drug-running boats from Venezuela in the Caribbean. To date, there have been 22 such attacks in the Caribbean and the Pacific that have killed a total of 87 people, according to the Pentagon. The most controversial, the first one on September 2nd, when a missile strike killed 9 people, and then a second strike killed the 2 survivors. Were they still in the fight? Was the second strike a proper act of war, or was it a crime to kill them? Did Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth give the order? And what is the overall rationale and authority for the ongoing operation? Maine's entire congressional delegation has questions, starting with Representative Shelley Pingree and Senator Angus King.
Now, number one, we've been trying since they started these attacks to get their legal justification, and it's time to put that out there because it looks very flimsy to most of us who are looking at their legal justification for why they're doing this.
It's all about the facts, Kate. The law is clear. If the facts are as have been alleged, that there was a second strike specifically to kill the survivors in the water, that's a stone-cold war crime.
Representative Jared Golden said in a tweet, "We need to know who made what orders, when, and why." Senator Susan Collins told the Bangor Daily News Secretary Hegseth's alleged actions warrant vigorous oversight. So there's a lot going on here. Lisa, what's your view of the big picture and maybe specifically this one attack that's gotten so much scrutiny?
Well, actually, Congress did just view the video of the second attack, and it was discovered that Hegseth didn't give the order to, kill all survivors. So, and there was a lot of mixed reviews coming out of that viewing of that second strike. But it does seem like there's still questions to be answered. But even, one of the Democrats said he felt better about the intent of what was happening. And for myself personally, I've been uncomfortable with what's happening with these boat strikes and thinking, what are we doing blowing up boats? So I talked to a retired Coast Guard that told me that actually it was very common for them to be taking out boats in the Caribbean that they knew were drug running boats. But rather than
blowing them up, I cut you off.
They didn't.
They just intercept them.
No, they took out their engines.
Oh.
So they killed their engines. So the people remained alive and the drugs remained in the boat. And then one of their allies, of course, in the drug cartel would come out, pick them up and put them on another boat and off they go again. So it was really an effective way to deal with that, in my opinion. So, but what that helped me understand is that this is, obviously an intensification of that, but it's the same type of thing. We have for some time, according to this retired Coast Guard, been sort of attacking these boats and making sure that we're at least trying to stop that flow of drugs, and now that's intensified. So I don't want to see drugs coming into the U.S. I have personally lost people to drugs. This is a real war on drugs. I'm happy to see us doing it. I am also very glad that there's oversight by Congress. I think that is appropriate and needed.
Well, I guess there's two issues to follow up with you, and I'll turn to you, BJ. One is, are these criminals or combatants that we're going after? And secondly, when we talk about a war on drugs, my understanding is most of the cocaine doesn't come from Venezuela, it comes from Colombia or Ecuador, and the fentanyl comes from Mexico with chemicals imported from China. So what about what's going on from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, clearly a lot of the statements about this strike underscore the dramatic challenges that come with it. And it's not just Democrats who are raising flags. There are Republican members of Congress from across the country that have talked about this being a challenge. And while there's questions about Hegseth's involvement, what we do know is that Hegseth said that he supported that second strike, and he said that on the record. And when you dig down to what actually is a war crime and what is a crime, the Department of Defense's own manual says that a strike on a shipwreck is a war crime, is a crime. And that is what happened. The second strike was a strike on a shipwreck. And so clearly someone has to be held accountable. I don't think that this can be, brushed over. So, some action is going to have to be taken, and someone, will ultimately have to answer for it. But, obviously we've seen a lot of challenges with Hegseth throughout his tenure, whether that be the use of a signal chat to talk about strikes or this specifically. And so, I think that's what happens when you put a Fox News host as the head of the Department of Defense.
Well, that's ignoring his military history, but I do agree that there should be oversight. I think that's what Congress's role is, and I'm glad to see it. I think we absolutely should be having oversight in this. I mean, I don't want to see us get into a war. There are some people that are saying this is sort of bringing us toward that. And other people are saying no. That's a line. That's a line too far. We won't be doing it. I don't see us going to war.
You mean with Venezuela?
With Venezuela.
That this is all a pretext to topple Nicolas Maduro, who actually did steal an election last year, right?
Allegedly?
No, I think in fact.
So
I think his opposition leader just won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So I think there is probably more going on here than just drugs, right? I think we all definitely see that, but still, oversight is essential. And I'm glad to see that Congress is taking an interest in actually viewing tapes and asking all the right questions. I agree with Susan Collins, who said, I'm going to wait until all the facts are established.
Navy Admiral Mitch Bradley did tell Congress in those briefings that Lisa mentioned, the closed-door briefings, that there was no kill-them-all order. So there's that. But what about if this is really, a sincere war on drugs escalation? What about the contradiction with President Trump pardoning the president of Honduras this week, who was serving a 45-year sentence for drug smuggling?
Correct. I mean, you can't have it both ways, but this president has shown many times that there are a lot of contradictions that exist in many of his policies and many of the things that he does. And even if there wasn't a order to kill them all, there was still a second strike. And that second strike on a shipwreck, according to the Department of Defense, is not allowed. And it happened. So I think no matter what the order was, the action was illegal.
Should have taken the prisoner?
I think normally they would do something to get those folks off the boat, but what they don't do is blow up the boat.
All right, let's leave it at that. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, a closer look at Maine's climate goals and future. This week, the Maine Climate Council met and issued what sounded like a mixed report card when it comes to the lofty goals that Governor Janet Mills announced in 2020 for the year 2030. Maine's renewable energy use has risen to 55%, which is on pace, but electric vehicles are behind pace, only 20,500 on the road here in Maine, or 13% of the goal of 150,000 over the next 5 years. And home weatherization for low-income families also a little behind. It's reached 42% of its goal of 10,000 homes. Now, former Mills top advisor Hannah Pingree, who co-chaired the Climate Council and implemented the plan for 6 years, this week was endorsed in her run for governor by Maine conservation voters. Pingree, a Democrat, framing what's at stake as a battle with President Trump.
He's weakened basic public health protections. He's selling off public lands, and he's even threatened to drill for oil in the Gulf of Maine. Good idea? No. Bad idea. And that means one thing. Governors across the country must step up. Governors must be the firewall for our environment, for our democracy, and for the future that we leave for our children.
So we have our climate goals. They're kind of lofty. I'm not sure which ones you would support. So what's your view of the report card? Kind of mixed.
Yeah, well, you know, it's been really expensive so far. Since 2019, just before they started these goals, since before that, the cost of electricity has almost doubled, and we're having another $11 to $16 increase in January. So these are the costs of these green energy initiatives. The PUC chair and CMP have stated just in August that the increases were due to legislation enacted to support Maine's climate and clean energy initiatives. So I think there's three major issues with the Climate Action Plan. One is there's no cost-benefit analysis. You know, the impact, you could take out Maine's entire economy, and we are not even going to be a blip in the radar of carbon emissions. And yet we're really pushing a lot of costs on the back of Mainers here. So there's not a concern for that. The plan also says it's, it claims that it's dedicated to equity, but there's no definition of equity. And the costs of this plan are really hurting poor people, older Mainers, and rural Mainers more than anyone else. But they can't claim that this is inequitable because there's no definition of equitable. So there's a disparate impact of this. And the third thing about the plan that I think is just terrible is the fact that they want 30% of Maine's land to be basically conserved and under government control. And that's anti-American, it's anti-human flourishing. People should be able to own property. And so if we're scooping it up and keeping it away from people, we're impacting their ability to have land and own land and really pursue the American dream.
I guess you have a different view of the climate goals. And what about Hannah Pingree's comment that going forward, the federal government's not going to be our friend, at least the current administration?
Yeah, I think that Lisa's right. A lot of the policies that have passed have been to encourage the development of renewable energy, and that's often paid for by the ratepayer on electric bills. And there are other ways to fund renewable energy. And in fact, there was a very successful tax credit within the Inflation Reduction Act that incentivized building renewable energy with good paying jobs. That is now mostly going away, although in the big beautiful bill there were some credits that were retained. But I think that there needs to be some sort of formula to help incentivize the development of renewable energy that isn't only owned by the ratepayer. And that's the only way you're really ever going to achieve these goals, because a ratepayer can only take so much. And the PUC's responsibility when they make decisions related to rates, when they make decisions related to RFPs for new energy projects, is to consider the impact on the ratepayer. So there needs to be something else. But the elephant in the room here is that the goals set by the climate plan always understood that there had to be some sort of pathway forward that realized the potential of offshore wind in Maine. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about that, and there have been things done by the legislature to try to protect the fishing community, but that is at a complete halt because of the federal government. And so while the federal government may not be an ally in this for the next, couple of years, few years, they do carry a significant role that they have to play in order for Maine to meet these climate goals.
And some of the incentives have gone away. Like when we talk about EVs, there was a $1,000 state incentive. There was a $7,500 buy-it-in incentive to get a new EV. Those are gone. That probably doesn't trouble you at all.
Well, I mean, incentives are still on the back of taxpayers, right? In order to bring those about, and who takes advantage of them are not the poorest of the poor, who are the ones that are helping to, create those incentives. So I do have a problem with the idea that we are more concerned about carbon emissions every step of the way than we are about the impact on human flourishing and on people's lives, because people matter more, but people care about the environment. There's also this idea that people aren't going to, in the free market, because of their choices and because of how they want to take care of the environment, that they aren't going to push to have changes made that will address climate change and try to pursue clean energy. I believe that people will. I know that Mainers care about the climate, but their pocketbooks can only handle so much. And I would say Mills and Pingree are tone deaf to most Mainers who can't afford their lofty goals.
Quickly, BJ Mills says the climate doesn't know whether you're a Democrat or Republican or independent. We still need to think globally and act locally, in your view?
Yeah, I think that's correct. And when done the right way, these changes can actually save money. Weatherization saves money. Heat pumps, a lot of people have realized savings on their heating bills. I think that there are ways to do this to realize cost savings and protect the environment, but it takes creative solutions.
And one way Wayne has surpassed its goals is 180,000 heat pumps over the 100,000 goal that Governor Mills set out some years ago. So more in the future on this, of course. When Political Brew returns, a closer look at homelessness across the state. As the weather gets colder, concern for homeless people sleeping outside grows. In the past 2 years, Portland has largely dismantled homeless encampments, and the city's 258-bed shelter and services center is largely full every night, about 10 or 15 open beds. Every day on the streets of Portland, you may come across homeless people wandering around, panhandling, sleeping on sidewalks. Some resist going to shelter. Some may be mentally ill. Mayor Mark Dion believes the biggest problem is drug addiction. He told me in an interview he's frustrated that surrounding towns and cities don't do more.
I don't expect one of them to stand up a 200-plus shelter, but they could put up 10 beds or a half dozen. And if I presented you the registry of the individuals in our shelter, the vast majority of them come from outside the city of Portland. So the question for those communities is, how long do you expect the taxpayers of Portland to pay for a burden that you should carry as well?
A few other cities are taking small steps to help the homeless. In Brunswick, there's a new 16-bed emergency shelter run by the nonprofit Bedford Housing. And in Lewiston, there is also a new 24/7 shelter. The nonprofit Cadence Kitchen has expanded it into an overnight shelter with 40 beds. So BJ, clearly this is not just a perennial seasonal problem in the winter, it's a year-round problem all over the country. Is Portland doing enough? Are the cities that aren't named Portland doing enough?
I mean, this is a crisis all around, and part of it has to do with, it stems from many crises that exist, whether it's a mental health crisis, we've got a housing crisis, we've got a drug crisis. I mean, it all bears its head through people being unhoused. And Portland is doing a lot for sure, and it's great to see other towns step up. But part of the challenge is that you need to have these resources near service centers, because it's not just a bed that these folks need, it's quite a bit more. And the legislature has done some really positive things for wraparound services, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And I think, we talk about it this time of year, but you're right, it's a year-round problem, and it seems like, I think Mayor Dion said in the interview that it feels like whack-a-mole, because there's just one solution and then you solve that problem and then there's another one that pops up. But the underlying issues remain the same. Mental health crisis, there's a housing crisis, and there's a drug crisis, and we've got to address those.
Lisa?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, BJ. And we need to do far more for mental health. Many of the people on the streets, like you said, I think don't even want to go into the shelter, right? They're in such a state that they don't want that. However, I do take exception to Mayor Dion saying that Portland taxpayers are bearing the brunt of this, because 65% of all of the state's GA funding goes straight to Portland. So
tell us what GA funding is.
General assistance funding. Mm-hmm. So they're getting $25.5 million out of our biennial budget just to Portland on the backs of all Maine taxpayers. So we definitely are helping and doing our part there. Part of the reason that Portland has such a problem with homelessness is that they have been a sanctuary city since 2017. And I have a really interesting excerpt from a blog from an immigration nonprofit advocacy group who wrote, "Despite the distance and chilly climate, Portland's toasty warm sanctuary city-style hospitality, liberal benefits, and disregard for lawful status more than compensates." So here's a blog telling all, immigrants basically come to Portland, Maine. So people are traveling over 2,000 miles from our southern border to come to Portland, Maine. And of course, on top of the fact that there's already a shortage of housing and we already have the other issues, ongoing, the drug issues and all the rest, having a huge influx of immigrants has also, created, exacerbated this problem a lot. And Portland brought it on itself.
All right, but other cities could possibly do more. Lewiston, the second largest city, only recently with the shelter with 16 beds. They've struggled for years to reach a consensus. In Bangor, they've announced they're going to sweep up a somewhat large encampment outside, 50 people sleeping outside over the next couple of weeks. And there's no sanction site for them to go. That's Bangor. What's your view? I mean, maybe there's other state funds to go around, GA money, as Lisa mentioned, that could be spread more evenly to other cities. What do you think?
Well, the way that this is often addressed is with funding that is specific for shelters. Shelter funding is the solution, and what's happened is many of the shelters, because there's such a need for resource, will go to Augusta and advocate for funding for their shelter specifically, which I do not hold that against the shelter. They're trying to do what they can, but it doesn't allow for a holistic solution. It doesn't allow for a solution that ensures that there's shelter funding for communities around the state. And so what happens is the shelters that have access to stronger advocacy end up getting access to additional funds. And so you're never going to solve this problem with GA alone. You really need dedicated funding to build shelters, and that's a long-term solution. Just like the long-term solution is to address the housing crisis. We've got to build 80,000 units in a short amount of time, and that's a tall order. But this is only going to become worse if that's not addressed.
We have a little bit of a give and take between compassion and public safety with this issue, right? I mean, we can't arrest your way out of the problem.
Right, you can't, right? And they're human beings that we need to care for. And, one of the issues is that we closed down all of our asylums. I mean, we need mental health asylums. Some people cannot live out on their own, and we basically said, oh, that's inhumane, and we kicked them out on the street because we have no place to keep them, and a jail isn't appropriate, and a hospital isn't appropriate, but we need some other appropriate place for people to be cared for that have serious mental health issues, because the street isn't the place for them either, and it's so unsafe, like the stabbing that happened. I mean, I don't know the history, the actual case there, but
the stabbing on November 22nd
right, in Portland, right.
A homeless man allegedly stabbed a man from Freeport.
Right, and so there is a huge safety concern.
We don't know.
People shouldn't be allowed to be outside shooting up, having sex, all the rest, defecating in the streets and in our parks. Like, that should not be allowed. But also, we need to do something with the people.
And the debate continues: housing first, treatment first, maybe both at the same time. We'll leave it there. That's all for this edition of Political Brew. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.